Good morning. I'm going to begin a new video today, but it's actually a second effort at choosing my top 10 albums for 1967. Now, I originally did this about 4 years ago, and there was no camera in those days. I was too camera shy, but I decided I'm going to revisit a number of those early videos, and this is the second one, the first ranking one, 1967. I was 13 years of age, and it's fair to say that these albums weren't exactly heard at that tender age. I arrived at them a little bit later, a few years later, when my teenage desire to listen to music appeared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now consider them sort of 56 years later after their release, 50 odd years after that first sort of insight into them when I heard them. And so there are a few changes if you want to compare them with that original, which you probably won't. And I'm going to start off with some honourable mentions. I'm going to run through these. They didn't manage to get in the top 10. They're albums that I have now listened to over the years, some of them only very recently, but I put them in my top 10, but not in, sorry, in my top 20, but not in any particular order. So let's go through them. There's Satanic Majesty's Request by the Rolling Stones, their answer to Sgt. Pepper. Yeah, there's some great tracks on here. I particularly like She's a Rainbow, of course, which is a big hit. Blowing Your Mind, the first Van Morrison album that he delivered after breaking up the band Them. I don't know this album that well, but it's certainly going to be in there. Disraeli Gears, Cream, an excellent album really, with the trio of Clapton, Bruce and Baker. It's definitely up there as one of the best albums of 67. And Aretha Arrives. I really only got into Aretha in any depth a few years ago, and this is a beauty. And then Songs from a Room, back in 1971, when I was listening to it in my friend's bedroom. I really couldn't handle it at all, but I've grown to love Leonard, and this album has got the beautiful Suzanne on it, and Sisters of Mercy. Something Else by the Kinks. Yeah, I wasn't really into the Kinks albums back in the day, but I love the singles, and so the highlight on this one for me are Waterloo Sunset and Death of a Clown. That was of course written by Brother Dave. And then The Who, Sellout. Can't say I really like this album much. I haven't played it enough really, but certainly I Can See for Miles and Miles, the hit single, is majestic to say the least. And then the last honourable mention before I select 11 is Sunny in the Park by Chicago. This arrived many years after it was recorded, released in 1994, and I got it on CD. It's supposed to be a performance of the Chicago Transit Authority live, and the recording is end of 67, I understand. So let's move on now to number 11, Just Missed Out. It's Piper at the Gates of Dawn by Pink Floyd. I got to this album a few years after I heard Pink Floyd for the first time, when I bought I'm a Gummer, and of course there are similarities in as much that I'm a Gummer, the live album, had Astronomy Domine, and it originally appeared on this album back in '67. It's a tremendous piece of music, but it's that and Interstellar Overdrive are really the only two tracks that I can recall from this album, but great they certainly are. So that's really my look at honourable mentions, and now I'm going to get on to that top 10. So let's get started into number 10. My choice, Axis Boulder's Love, the second album from the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It was released late in the year following the debut, which came I think in the spring. This album is very underrated, but I consider it to be up there. Favourite tracks, well, I think tracks 3, Spanish Castle Magic, really sort of woke me up when I bought it, and I bought it in a special promo disc that cost just £1, and I bought it. I think I bought it when I was 15, so a couple of years on from its release. Other great tracks, of course, are Bold as Love, which ends the album. Just a point of reference, there's a great cover version of this Bold as Love by John Mayer that you might want to check out. I think it's on his second or third album. Then the immaculate Little Wing, of course, also covered by Derek and the Dominoes on Layla, but Hendrix's version I think is just a little better, and it's a beautiful ballad. And I'm going to stick the lyric on the end of this chat so you can give it a read. So anyway, that's about it. Oh, one final track, Castles Made of Sand, another beautiful ballad. Interesting that castles on two of the songs. So anyway, that's my number 10. Now you can peruse that lyric to Little Wing. It's Axis Boulder Love by Jimi Hendrix Experience, and it's at number 10. To 9 then, Buffalo Springfield, the album titled Buffalo Springfield again. Now I came to this album mid-70s. Certainly didn't hear it at the time that it was released, and even when I was 16, 17. I was in my early 20s when I decided to go back after falling in love with Neil Young and Stephen Still's music. Some great tracks on here, it has to be said. Expecting to Fly and Broken Arrow, both written by Young. Note the orchestral feel of these two, which I have to confess wouldn't have really attracted me back in the day, but here now in the sort of new millennium, 20 years on, I can fully appreciate them. So the soul, Mr. Soul, a more appropriate type of young rocker, and then the standout track, as far as I'm concerned, on this album is a short version of Bluebird, written by Steve Stills. The band also incorporated Richie Fury, who later went on to create Poco. But Bluebird, I actually got a double album of Best Of by Buffalo Springfield, and it had a version of Bluebird which was 13 minutes long. It's absolutely tremendous. Guitar work by Steve Still at the highest level. So anyway, it's in at number 9, Buffalo Springfield again by Buffalo Springfield. Try and get to listen to it. It's absolutely brilliant. So to 8 then, and this is Younger Than Yesterday by the Byrds. Again, this album really only got regular plays a handful of years back. At the time of its release, and even when I was a teenager, I really never got to listen to this. But now I have to say that the tracks on it, a number of them, are real highlights. So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, written by Roger McGuinn, opens the album. It was a big hit at the time, and it's a terrific pop music, really. And then My Back Pages, which was a cover of a Dylan song, and finally Everybody's Been Burned, David Crosby song, which is a highlight on the album. They were very much seen as the American Beatles at the time, and of course McGuinn and Crosby were renowned for great songs, and so as I say, great album. It certainly arrived a few years ago, and that's why I put it at number 8. To number 7 then, and this is the debut album by The Doors. The Doors, of course, Jim Morrison, Ray Manzarek, John Densmore and Robbie Krieger. Some awesome stuff on this album, and it just gets the edge over LA Woman as my favourite Doors album. A spellbinding single, of course, Light My Fire, and also the single Break On Through, which I find very enjoyable. But the highlight of this album is the 12-minute epic closer called The End, and of course my absolute love of the movie Apocalypse Now has had some effect on why this album is at number 7. The soundtrack to Apocalypse Now, of course, also had a cover of this track, and it's one of those tremendous sort of pieces of music that fully sort of there's a metaphor here as to how you view it as part of the war experience in Vietnam, and the lyric by Morrison can be interpreted in many ways, but one of them is particularly about apocalypse type war. Alongside that, of course, the song also describes the end of relationships, the tragic end of relationships, and so definitely a highlight of the album. And the lyric by Morrison is 5-star. So that's my number 7. It's the debut album by The Doors. It's just called The Doors. Number 6 then, as I'm eating my breakfast. Now this one wasn't in the original Oreo top 10 for 67, but I made a bit of a mistake. I'd forgot it, but I haven't forgotten it this time, 4 years on. It's Safe as Milk by Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band, their debut album. In the UK I actually bought the album, but it was called Dropout Boogie, which was the title of a track on the album, and it was issued by Buddha Records on a very cheap sort of promotion, and I got it for £1, would you believe it. Now on this album there was no Zany, Zoot Horn Rolo or Rocket Morton. They appeared on the second album, Strictly Personal. However, the Delta Blues was very much central to this album, but they did have one very young Ry Cooder on guitar. The Magic Band included Hanley on bass, Sinclair on guitar and John French on drums, and as I say, Cooder provided additional guitar parts. I also, for interest's sake, I also bought 2 singles just before I bought the album, and these were the first 2 singles by Beefheart, called Moonchild and Yellow Brick Road. And on the B-side to Yellow Brick Road was Abba Zaba, which did appear on this Dropout Boogie album. It's an absolute tremendous piece of work, and in many ways it's my favourite. God forbid that I struggled with Tout Mars Replica. And now to go on to 5. This is the debut album by Procol Harum. There's 2 magical singles on this album, but only on the US version. On the UK version, we had a Conquistador, but there was no A Whiter Shade of Pale. That turned up on the US version, and that's obviously the version I prefer. The first exposure to A Whiter Shade of Pale for me at the tender age of 13, remarkable single, still one of my favourite singles of all time. Written by Keith Reid and Gary Brooker, and I'm going to include the lyric at the end of my chat here. As I say, great album, one of the more interesting albums that appeared on that year. That's why I've got it at number 5. So there we have it, the debut by Procol Harum, and it's number 5 on my countdown. And cast your eyes onto that lyric. At number 4 then is The Magical Mysteries Tour by the Beatles. In the UK it was released as an EP, but it became an album when released in the US, and basically I got to hear this a little bit later, but the US copy of the album is why it's made number 4 in my ranking. Of course, the US copy included the AA side single that was released in the UK, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, which was absolutely magical. Penny Lane, of course, referencing a actual street in Liverpool where the boys grew up. Hello Goodbye, wonderfully happy piece of pop music, and many others on the album that I love. Fall on the Hill, the McCartney song, is also terrific. And there's a lyric popping up next to me of I Am a Walrus, which will amuse you for the imagery, which was very much a reflection of what could happen if one indulged in the drug LSD. Yeah, I did indulge, confession. Okay, so have a look at that lyric, and it's at number 4. It's Magical Mysteries Tour by the Beatles. So to number 3 in my top 10 then, and this is an album by Love called Forever Changes. Now, I did buy this album when I was about 17. I was influenced by a review and I decided to buy it. I have to confess that I didn't play it a lot at the time. I was heavily into guitar type music, particularly Hendrix. And of course, Arthur Lee released a solo album after this Love album, and Hendrix played on it, and I bought that as well, but that hasn't made my top 10. But this album I grew to love over the years, and I find it an absolute stunner of an album. I think it's my mellowness, really, in my listening tastes that have helped me get into this album. Of course, Lee highlighted the string arrangements, which he gave great depth to these pop songs, and along with McLean, I think, who wrote some of the other material, they put together some classic songs. A couple that are my favourites are Alone Again or, and similar titled, and More Again. Still love this album. I think it's an album that has stood the test of time, and make no apologies for putting this album at number 3. It's called Forever Changes, and it was by Love. So to my number 2 in my top 10 for 1967, and this was also number 2 when I did my video 4 years ago. That of course was only an audio. So anyway, why is it number 2? Well, this was the debut by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and when this arrived in the public arena, it was met with absolute astonishment, and the question was asked, how can anybody create this type of music with the style of guitar playing that just blew everybody away? Hendrix's guitar work on this was just unbelievably good, and it got the attention of other guitar greats, particularly in the UK, with Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton going to see Hendrix when he performed in the UK. It was basically, I heard this fairly frequently, but I heard it on tape. I had a tape recorder, an old-fashioned tape recorder, and I managed to get a recording of it on tape, and I tended to listen to it back in 1969, late 68, 69, and I was at the tender age of only 14, 15 then, but I wasn't buying albums at that stage, so that's why this tape recorder was being used. I used to tape record shows by John Peel and got a huge collection of music material, which drove my mother mad. This album particularly, because I used to play it extremely loud. Of course, shortly after this, the epic Electric Ladyland was released. But the highlights of this album, well, virtually every track really, blues rock, standard blues, psychedelic, fast rock, you name it. My favourite track, I think, was probably Third Stone from the Sun, which was on second side. But you can just go through the track list. Foxy Lady opened it up, Manic Depression followed, then Red House, great blues, I Don't Live Today, and you just go on and on and on. And I particularly like Fire, which was, as the title suggests, extremely fast and fiery. So there we have it, my number 2 selection, I Experienced, by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, with Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums, and of course on guitar, James Marshall Hendrix. So my number 1, no surprises for guessing this one, I think, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. I do remember this vaguely when I was 13 years of age. I think my sister bought it. She was 6 years older than me, in 19, and I got to hear it. I didn't really fully understand it then, but early into my musical career, I decided to track it down, and I got a second-hand copy. And it remains in my collection to this day. I never actually bought it again, but it's obviously a huge record in my life, and the most of the record appreciative public. That's why in many people's lists it's the greatest pop album of all time. Tracks that I found absolutely tremendous. The Closer is my favourite, A Dying Alive. Absolutely awesome piece of work, with those 3 sections started off by John, then the middle section sang by Paul, and then the final section by John again. The lyrics are here for your perusal. I won't read them, but it's an absolute gem of a song. But it's not the only song on this album. I could list them all, but I'm going to put a track list up just to remind you of how great this album was. And get into the lyrics. There's some tremendous pieces of work here. She's leaving home, very tearful story of a young adolescent escaping the clutches of their parents for a life with their first love. Anyway, that's it from me. That's my top 10 for 1967, delivered to you on camera for the first time. Put your top 10 in the comments. Any that I might have missed that I need to listen to. I'm always willing to explore the huge number of albums that I haven't really given listening time to, even these 1967 classics. So that's my lot. See you the next time.